in the years of the Bulls, the Mike and the Mad Dog Show did a lot of stuff on the Bulls because everybody did. Whenever they came to New York, whenever it was Knicks and Bulls series, whenever the Bulls were in the playoffs, whenever they were in the finals. And the Mike and the Mad Dog Show used one guy and one guy only for the Bulls, the guy who was the go-to guy for the Bulls. So as all this stuff is being relived now, I said, the guy I got to get on the show is Sam Smith because nobody knew the Bulls better than Sam Smith. They can all say they did, and everyone probably acts like they do now. But I'm telling you, folks, having lived through it, the guy who knew the Bulls better than anybody was Sam Smith. Sam, welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, good to talk to you. I remember all those courtside interviews.
Absolutely, you were our guy. We only used you for everything, and I mean, we exhausted you. We had you on our show so many times. So
no, I had to be there to defend Phil Jackson against Pat Riley all the time.
First of all, how long did you know, Sam, that this thing was in the makings, or had you heard rumblings? What do you know about the documentary?
I really didn't. You know, we knew. I remember the film crew from NBA Entertainment being around that season and embedded. And then we'd always heard that because I remember one time somebody had asked about all their footage they had gotten because they were sort of wallpaper after a while. They were just kind of hanging around. Adam Silver, nobody, we didn't know who he was at the time. He was NBA Entertainment, and somebody wondered whatever happened to all that, and they said, well, Michael never gave him permission to use it. I got to sign off on that stuff. So, and with Michael's reclusiveness over these last almost 20 years, I really thought that was it. He had signed out and moved, got his new family in Florida, built his golf course, and we'd see him a couple of times. We'd go to Charlotte. I saw him a year or two ago, and made some small talk. But I was surprised, frankly, that he sat for this. He certainly doesn't need the money.
Nope.
So, yeah,
Why do you think? Do you think there's some ulterior financial motive here for something, or somebody got to him to get him to agree to this?
No, there might be an element. The only thing I could think, I know there's some notion of, he's jealous of LeBron, and they're saying, LeBron's the greatest, and
right.
He's needs to. I don't know so much about that. Maybe, I think it goes back a little bit to the Hall of Fame speech. Michael, kind of loves settling scores.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he does. Yes, as he did the other night with Isaiah.
I'm coming up next.
Yeah.
With the Jordan rules after Isaiah and Krause and that famous Hall of Fame speech, which I remember, being there for it, and everybody said was sort of horrified. Oh, after all these, and I said, no, that's him. That's the guy. That's the guy we knew, and that's the fun part of it, where he's tears off the Band-Aid, and he doesn't care what anybody thinks. And so, it seems to be like an element of that, more like he's so comfortable. Somebody mentioned it to him, and he said, "You know what? What the hell? Yeah, go ahead."
It's funny, and we're talking with Sam Smith, who I tell you, folks, was the guy. He knew he was the best go-to guy for the Bulls more than anybody. Anybody, anywhere. I don't care what anybody says. He was around it. He had better sources. He was more involved than anybody. And I've told people when I've heard about this, and people would ask me about it, what do you remember about this and what do you remember about Jordan, this? I'd say, listen, what first of all you don't realize is Jordan's an SOB. He's not a nice guy. I mean, he is what he is. He's a fiercely competitive, take no prisoners. He doesn't care what he says. That's it. That's Jordan. I said, I don't know how much of that's going to be depicted in this, but, I think you've seen at least in the Isaiah stuff or, different things, you see where it shines through that's what Jordan was. He was a tough cookie.
Yes, it's interesting. Yeah, you're right. You're exactly right. And it's what he evolved to because of the frustrations, and some of which they did mention. And I think they've done a really good job and asked a lot of the right questions too. He really resented Magic because they were comparing him. And he said even in the show how much he hated that.
Right.
They were saying, well, Bird's a winner, Magic's a winner, and you remember too from that era. The notion was hey, you can't win with this guy.
Right, he was
so
a scorer. He was a
scores all the
scorer.
time.
Right, yeah.
You know, like he's like a George Gervin with a good smile.
Right, didn't make
stuff.
anybody better. That
Right.
kind of thing.
Right,
Right.
and that was the narrative, even in Chicago.
Yep.
And so what developed, you know, in his frustration about, you know, the famous always line was, well, you know, Michael would say, would you tell me? He said, yeah, you know, Bird, he's making guys better. Well, he's making McHale and Parrish better.
Right, Hall of Famers better.
Right.
Worthy and Jabbar.
Kareem and Worthy. He said, I got, you know, Sam Vincent and Charles Davis. What are you talking about?
Yeah, people didn't understand. I mean, Bird's got 5 Hall of Famers, you know, and so does Magic. And they learned, and they learned. But you know, I thought they did a really good job. There's 2 things that I thought of, Sam, and you could tell me whether I'm wrong or not. I thought with Isaiah, a big part of it was an incident at the All-Star game that I remember where Isaiah treated Jordan really badly at an All-Star game, like kicked the ball down the other end of the court or something in Jordan's first All-Star game, and that started it or something. That's something that stuck in my head. I don't know if that's true or not. That just stuck.
Well, yeah, there was an element, and that's what they called the freeze out, supposedly.
Right. Yeah.
And it really didn't happen because supposedly 2 of the 3 involved in it were Magic and Gervin, you know, who were on the other team.
Right.
You know, so they couldn't. So the notion was, those players, what it was Jordan showed up wearing a lot of the Nike stuff, and his marketing thing separated him from everybody. But there was a lot of bitterness among the other All-Stars, where, you know, it wasn't so much he's wearing a Nike garb instead of, you know, the league, you know, was during a practice, but they didn't have all these endorsements. Here's this guy's 1-0. He's a rookie basically, and he's got more endorsements than Magic and Bird. And so, Bird couldn't care less. You know, give him a 6-pack of beer. That's enough endorsements for him. But, you know, Magic was mad about that. And Isaiah and Magic had the same agent. So afterwards, the agent, you know, because Magic and Isaiah are complaining to the agent about why we don't have what this kid's got. The agent says, you know, comes up with this thing about how they froze him out because Michael had like 7 points, which is basically what Bird scored in his first All-Star game. It wasn't unusual.
Right.
Anyway, so this narrative came, Isaiah froze him out. The very next game in Chicago after the break is the Pistons. Now, Michael's read about this in the paper, that there was this conspiracy against him. So he's like in a fury about this, scores like 49 points in the game, has this, you know, and taunting Isaiah. And from that point on, the rivalry and as the Pistons Bulls thing got, but that kicked off that whole thing. You know, Isaiah being a Chicago guy, Isaiah resented Michael for now being the hero of his city. So all these elements came together. But yeah, that first All-Star game sort of motivated Michael's feud.
We're talking with Sam Smith, who, as I said, in the Bull years, covered the team and was the guy, go-to guy. We had him he did interviews with Dog and myself, I'm telling you, 100 times, if not 200 times during those years, because we were around that team forever. I mean, we used to love to go to Chicago for the finals. If the Knicks didn't make it, and they didn't, we would go anyway, and we went to the finals every year, and we loved that stuff. I tell people how great that Madhouse on Madison was. It was unbelievable. I mean, with that, used to go downstairs to eat in that crummy little place downstairs, right? I mean, but it was such a loud, great. They tell me it was louder, Sam, for the Blackhawks. I never was there for a hockey game, but I'll tell you, if it was louder for the only other place that I've ever been in the league that was as loud was I was in Portland in the old days, in the old place that was 12,000, and that
right, the old Rose Garden.
And they played the Lakers in a playoff series, and I was working for CBS with Brent, and I'm telling you, you couldn't even hear the truck through the headset. It was so loud. That's the only other building I was ever in that was that loud, as it was in Chicago.
Yeah, it was, and it probably was loud. You know, hockey was sort of more spread out because of the ice and everything. But you know what it was like? It was like the old Garden. I grew up in New York, and so I remember the old Garden on 8th Avenue fondly. You know, it wasn't quite as loud because, you know, there was so many gamblers downstairs, you know, just making bets. It couldn't be that loud, you know, behind the baskets. But you had that balcony overhang, you know, where in those old arenas like the stadium, Chicago Stadium, and the old Madison Square Garden, you know, where the upper deck hung right over the court. And so you had this incredible wall of sound, and, you know, with Jordan and the Bulls and, you know, what it had become this phenomenon. And so, and you saw it more even in some of those Knicks series because it was so intense. You know, that even though the Pistons Bulls, you know, was the signature rivalry for the Bulls, and the Knicks didn't win, so it couldn't have reached that
Even
level.
when they had the good teams, I mean, the Charles Smith series, as we call it, that series, they
Right.
thought they could win that year.
They should have won that year.
Yeah, and they could have. I mean, let's be honest, they could have. But you know what? They never could get over the top against them. It's funny. I thought they did a very good job of handling how painful the Detroit thing was for the Bulls, and I've always said that once the Bulls got past the Pistons, it was free sailing. I know everyone tries to make a big deal out of the first championship and the Lakers and everything, but I thought it was getting past. And once they grew up and got past, and to me, it was as much Pippen and Grant growing up as it was anything with Jordan, getting past those Pistons team. But I thought that, and Jordan, I think one line he threw away the other night was, hey, that meant as much to me as winning championships. I think it did. I thought beating the Pistons meant everything to them.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and Jordan had mentioned that, and that did, because that season, if you remember back, the NBA back then, the notion was always you had to go to the finals, sort of go through the wars and lose, and then before you win, like
Yep.
Boston and losing to the Lakers, Bird losing that first time, and then the Pistons losing, to the Lakers in the
Yep.
finals, and then Portland had been to the finals right before that with that great Portland team with Buck Williams and Drexler, Terry Porter, really deep team, Jerome Kersey, and they lose in the finals to Detroit, and now they start that 90-91 season 19-1. And so the Bulls are not thinking about it winning titles. I mean, really, nobody's talking about that. And I actually remember that season. We went into Detroit right before Christmas, and the Bulls got blown out, just lost by 25 or something. And Phil, after the game, was saying, "Hey, this team just might have it. We might have to change this team." And so they're on the verge of splitting apart. And all they can think of is getting by this Detroit team with, Pippen, obviously, Jordan, you could see 30 years later, he's still not sure about
the migraine game. Yep.
And so, now the other thing, you're right. Jordan didn't trust still Pippen and Grant.
Right.
He was maneuvering with management to try to get them to trade those two guys for Walter Davis and Buck Williams, because those are ACC guys he liked. I need veterans. He was always screaming about, I need veterans. And so until Horace and Scotty stood up to that,
Yep.
It didn't persuade him that they were capable of doing that.
I thought Sally's quote was perfect. The one time we finally knocked him down, he got up, went to the line, made the free throw, came down and dunked. We said, forget it. We're dust. It's over now. It's now we can't get in his head. Now it's over. Now we're physically done, and they were done. That was it.
Right, and those were the two elements. One, if they were going to stand up physically and not be complaining about it and not falling victim to it, and two, if Michael was going to trust them to play as a team, and then that element came up in Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Finally this matchup. Now they've lost in 6 in 1989. They lost in 7 in 1990. So now they got to win. They got to win in 91, or the Bulls are breaking up. They don't get past them now. And Game 1 and back in Chicago, first game in the conference finals, the Bulls take a lead and they get in the third quarter. Detroit comes back, and it's a similar pattern. Now they're within like 2 or 3 points, and Phil always rested Michael the first 3-4 minutes of the fourth quarter to keep him fresh for the end. And Phil was always underrated in how he understood players. Nobody was ever injured in that era. Phil really managed players well. He knew the physical part of it. So Michael comes off the court. Phil always was consistent and changed, and all the reserves come on, and they extend the lead out to double digits. And Michael, after that game, made his famous comments, about my supporting cast. And that's when he finally started to accept that, hey, I don't have to do it all by myself. I got teammates. And when Detroit knew, once he accepted he had teammates, they weren't good enough to beat the Bulls.
Yeah, and when people forget, they make it seem like they remember now, like, oh, the Bulls were going to go right past the Lakers. You remember this when the Lakers won Game 1? People were saying they were going to get swept.
Absolutely, absolutely. I being with the team, when you're with a team, you often have a higher view of it than others. But I had predicted the Bulls to win that. We always make these stupid predictions, and we're usually wrong. But I picked the Bulls in 5. So I remember, like all of my nicely, but all the media guys are like taunting me on the way out. Okay, I see. You got your thing going. It was universal at the Lakers because they had Magic and they had the veterans. Sam Perkins and Worthy and veteran teams. They had the experience, and here were these young kids. But I had seen these guys play. That to me was always the best Bulls teams, the first two title teams, because you had the best defensive two-guard in history. You had the best defensive small forward in history. And at the time, you had the best athletic defensive power forward. So you had these three incredible defensive players all on the wings and the lanes. And it was just so difficult. And even you saw it, they showed it. Magic is dribbling the ball up backward. He can't get up the court.
No, he got exposed in that series.
Right, but that's not even if you've got Jordan, who's Defensive Player of the Year on him.
Yep.
So this team, I felt this team was really an incredible team that people were underestimating, and obviously they could have lost Game 3, which went into overtime. Stuff happens, but you could see it was a team ready to break through, and yeah, you're right. People were shocked that first year.
And the other thing that I thought that now maybe they'll go back to this, but they made a big deal in the first one, and I didn't see the first. I saw the second one this Sunday. I didn't see the first one this Sunday, so I saw 3 of the 4. They made a big part, and I've always been a big Pippen guy, and I defended him a lot because I thought people were too rough on him, and I thought he was very valuable. I think he would have been very valuable somewhere else too if he had been put in the right spot, But the bottom line is, they talked about the contract, which was an absurd contract. But what I remember being a big issue was not even so much the contract as to when Krause went and gave Kukoc all that money, which is what drove Pippen crazy, because Krause wanted to find his next star, right? Because he didn't draft Jordan, so he wanted to find that next guy, and he gave Kukoc a lot of money, which really ticked off a lot of guys and drove Scotty nuts on that team.
Well, yeah, it would have been an element of it, but I really have to defend Jerry on that because in this year, he did an incredible thing, scouting move because Kukoc was a great. He was
very good
really
offensively.
Sacrificed
yes.
a lot with the Bulls. If Kukoc was the top player on a team, he'd have been like a 20-10 guy with 10 assists every game. He was like a Magic Johnson kind of player, 7-foot point guard and all that, and he played power forward for the Bulls because that's what they needed, and they had Scotty. But he went to Europe, and it was a sort of a bidding. He had to try to get this guy away from other teams at a time when the NBA was still pretty suspicious about overseas players, and so I think they had to financially make some sacrifices to do it, and so hey, look. What Krause was doing was to enhance the Bulls' championship, enhance the Bulls' possibilities to win. Scotty had his opportunities. I'm not that sympathetic, with what went on, because part of it, which they didn't really go into, was Scotty had back surgery after his first year. He had doubts that he would have a long career.
Right.
That's why I think he took the
And he came
money.
from dirt poor, so he thought the money he had was a lot more than any he could dream about.
Right.
Right.
That hey, I may only play a year or two,
gotcha.
but I can get 8 years out of this.
Gotcha. Well, even the first Jordan contract wasn't a good contract, right? If I remember right, it wasn't the Jordan contract really paltry for a couple of years too.
Yeah, and see that's the other thing too. Michael, when he came back in '95, he was finishing up an 8-year deal, and he came back those 2 months in '95. The famous 55 points in the Garden.
Right.
But then played the whole 95-96 season on that old contract where he was like, I don't know, the 80th highest paid player in the league or something. And I remember we'd ask him about that, and he'd say, hey, if they want to give me more money, that's fine. But he said, I signed a contract, and I have to play out my contract. When I play out my contract, I'm going to get my money. I'm not worried about that now. Now, he could say that, he had Nike and sneakers and all
right.
this sort of stuff. But he also set down the precedent with the team that you play out your contract. And so, Scotty was sort of hung out there a little bit.
What about the whole we all know the gambling stuff. Put the gambling in perspective, because I'm not a conspiracy guy in anything in life, and I'm not a conspiracy guy when it comes to Jordan. I don't think Jordan was run out of the league. I never believed that. I do know he was a crazy gambler, but he also had more money than anybody in the world too. So we know we like to gamble. Was the gambling in your mind ever destructive for that team?
Not at all. It's and I think they'll probably get into it. You remember the series in New York? I think it was that '93 that Charles Smith was referred to.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the ones where wasn't it Game 1 and Game 2 where Stark stunked on it at the end, and New York took that 2-0 lead. I think he went to Atlantic City between, maybe 1 and 2, 3 and 4, whatever it was.
That's when Dave Anderson wrote the story, right?
Yeah, Dave Anderson, of all guys, conservative. And,
well, he had a tip. Yeah, somebody called him. Yeah.
Michael went between games to Atlantic City. I remember it. So it became a big thing. The New York Times was, of all places, they were outraged about this. How could he do this? Let down his team. And I remember, someone asking me about that, and I said, he went to Atlantic City, got back, 2 in the morning. I said, I'm shocked. I can't believe it. He said, he never gets in before 5. I mean, so, and especially now, where all these leagues are in partnerships with all the gambling operations. And, I'm sure everybody, when they're in NCAA pools those years, they were declaring them on their taxes. I mean, it was just Michael's name. You know what? It didn't have to. It wasn't about the money ever with Michael. It was about the competition.
Yeah, and the action, right? Just like something to do, right?
It was just the action because that was.
He didn't sleep much, right? He didn't like to sleep much, right?
Yeah, he had. Yeah, I always said he had the nature of a hummingbird. He was constantly moving, and he always needed company around. There was always a game. I remember when I did this book a few years ago about the end of his career. I mean, sort of an oral history called "There Is No Next." And I talked to Magic about it, and we were talking about the Olympics. And he said, we'd play cards like all night. It'd be like 4 in the morning. And I said, hey, we got practice. I got to get up. Michael goes, come on, one more hand. He said, I can't. My eyes, I'm closed, and I can't stay up. I leave. He said, I find out before practice he played golf. And so, it was remarkable. He was going all the time, and was able, there was all, and then these stories are true. I remember, playoff series where in Miami, we get down finally out of all the bad weather, and it's April, which is still winter in Chicago, and he plays, 36, 45 holes of golf, and then goes and scores 48 points against the Heat. and this stuff was going on all the time with the guy, and so we got used to it. That's just who he is, and the action. Well, even when he was a rookie, because I remember Rod Higgins was his best friend.
Remember Rod Higgins? Sure,
and
absolutely.
He referred to all the drug users on that team, which was true. There were 6 players on that Bulls team that went into drug rehab from his rookie year, but that was what Jerry Krause was doing. He was breaking up that team, and it was essentially rebuilding with Michael Jordan, the front man, back then. So, Rod and him get friendly, and Rod's a really good ping pong player. So Michael bought a ping pong table and played ping pong all the time to practice so he could beat Rod. It was whatever you could compete at, and that's just that was what made him really the greatest in a sense, because he just competed all the time. And when they say the cliche in sports, the coach always goes, we got to play 48 minutes, and we know nobody does. He did, because he was looking to beat you on the first possession. And that's what elevates him among all these other players, that he had this incredible manic, probably sickness in part, drive to beat you all the time.
Never seen anything like it. Never seen anybody like it ever.
To do it, like
I think Tiger Woods came closest from what I'd seen recently. I think Jack Nicklaus might have been the same way, but Tiger Woods had that same ferocity. I've never seen any athlete have that more than Jordan had it. Jordan had it more than any player I ever saw. I mean, absolutely.
You're right about Tiger.
Yeah,
Tiger. And you see
very
what
much.
he did. He's probably the greatest golfer ever for that. I mean, that 10-year run is nothing we've ever seen before.
Sam, explain to the people, if you can, and the ones that may not understand. I mean, they know Michael Jordan. They know the name. They know the legacy, the whole thing, the sneakers, the God, the whole thing. In the time when the Bulls were as big as they were and Jordan was as big as he was, how can you describe the biggest of how big Jordan was?
Well, I remember one time, I think it was 95 when he was coming back, which was President Clinton had mentioned in his press conference about jobs. He said the job rate is going up because Michael Jordan's about to come back to basketball, so that's part. And then I remember we were at practice, and Tom Brokaw was setting up there to do the evening news. And then one of the other reporters goes, I think this is big here tonight.
They said the network
this is what
news.
It was. I mean, this was way beyond anything we'd ever seen in basketball. This was not sports. I mean, these were national and international events. David Stern, always talked about going to Asia and when they started in the international basketball, and they knew the Bulls. They didn't know any. They didn't know any other teams. They didn't know any of the players. They knew Jordan and they knew the Bulls, and that was it. So when he came back, probably after the gambling and everything and the baseball and the build up to the return and I'm back, he's probably the most famous person in the world at the time. It's extraordinary that a fairly simple basketball player, because that's what he was. He was just a kid who loved to play, who just wanted to compete and beat you on the basketball court. When he came to North Carolina, you saw, was it James Worthy had the great quote in this series about, I thought I was better than him for like 20 minutes or something. But even as a freshman, and you remember at the Hall of Fame speech where he was still mad at Dean Smith for not letting him get in the Sports Illustrated, cover picture because he was a freshman and they had that senior system there, upperclassman system. But he used to count in practice. He used to count the dunks, the times he dunked on Worthy or Perkins, and write it, on the board in the locker room to taunt him.
Well, you never heard a guy say, "I always picked out the best player on the team and went right at him on the court so I could prove that I was better than him right away." I mean, where do you ever hear anybody talk like that? You never hear that.
No, and you know what? There's a great one too. The second day of practice. And this is the old Angel Guardian. The Bulls are practicing in an old Catholic school back then with concrete floors when Jordan came. Can't imagine the level that franchise was. And so Kevin Lockery was the coach then, and he's back in the Bulls offices, which then had 12 employees, the total organization. And it's like before noon, and Rod Thorne, Rod told me this story. Rod asked him, "What are you doing back there?" Because he knew he had practice. And he said, this Jordan kid, every time he's on defense, he steals the ball from everybody. And every time he's on offense, he dunks on everybody. And he said everybody was getting so, depressed about what was going on. I had to stop practice. It got so out of hand.
And now, all these years later, how big are the Bulls still? I mean, this has probably rekindled some stuff, but how big is those teams? And not just Jordan, but how big is Jackson? And how big is Pippen? Especially those three, Jordan, Pippen, and Jackson. We know Jordan's on a different level, but how big is their legacy this many years later? I mean, I know if it's a Bulls game and they bring them out, it'll be like an old timers day, like it would be at Yankee Stadium if you brought out Mickey Mantle. But is it like that every time they see these guys, or what is it like now for these guys in Chicago?
Well, first of all, they're basically never here.
They're never there. Okay.
I don't think Jordan has been back in Chicago. I think
he doesn't spend any time in Chicago anymore at all.
Never.
Okay.
The first time I think the first time he's ever been to Chicago, basically since he retired, was in the All-Star game this year.
Gotcha.
And he didn't make a public appearance. He never came out. We were actually surprised. We know he doesn't. Until his documentary came out, we knew he wasn't doing anything in public, but. They have him the All-Star game in Chicago, and, he has to walk out, to talk to anybody, just walk out, and the building is going to go berserk, and he didn't even do that. And Phil, Phil doesn't come here. He's Montana or L.A., and so we never see him. Scotty was on the payroll of the team
for a little while, right?
I think that's faded away.
Gotcha.
I think that stopped this year, and so there's always some ambivalence a little bit towards Scotty from, some of the issues that have brought up over the years.
And they don't see Jordan doesn't ever come back for anything, right? He doesn't come back for.
He's never been back for anything.
Gotcha.
The only thing he came back for once is Johnny Kerr was dying, and they had a night for him, and he came back for that. That was the only time I can ever really remember him being in Chicago doing anything. Maybe he's had some Nike meetings, business meetings maybe, but. No, he's never.
And how big has this thing been in Chicago? This rekindling of this with this documentary, has it been that big a deal in Chicago?
Oh yeah, it's been. I mean, and like you said before, partially the timing. Doing this,
right.
During the virus, everybody's home, no sports, and then that made it even bigger, obviously. And ESPN, to their credit, recognized the opportunity. Because if this hadn't happened and it's going on in June after the finals, and you're talking baseball all week, and NFL, Bears is probably the number one sport in Chicago. So there'd be all this other stuff all week, and now with the lack of programming, sports talk radio is this, and the news station, or equivalent of whatever, WOO or WINS. I don't remember what's the news station in New York.
No, you're right. WINS is CBS also, but WINS is the one. 1010, is there? WINS,
right.
that one's still there.
Yeah. And so it's been great for the Bulls because it's sort of
WINS shares a floor with the fan. As a matter of fact, they share a floor together.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's with the Bulls having such a down period, and the community, and ended up they fired the GM, and they've got some new people, so they got some momentum, but they've kind of been able to hide behind all this acclaim for this great nostalgia about this great era that people. It's like you're going through history, and if you're at the Gettysburg Address, you weren't there, but I was there. You didn't think at the time that they're only quoting this 200 years later because it's like, it's raining and it's cold and, finish up, Abe, let's go. And it's sort of like that when it's day to day. You don't appreciate it as much as when you could look back on it.
Well, how about you reliving this? Because no one was listening. You were someone who had access to this guy. You were someone who actually had you had a role in this stuff. I mean, you really did. You were that close to this situation. You were there as this unfolded. You were there as this whole thing unfolded. So, I mean, what has it meant to you?
Well, it's as a lot of people realize, it's better to have good timing and good luck than anything else. And I just was fortunate to be at the right time at the right place. When I came up with the idea of writing the Jordan Rules, it was more of an exercise to see. I'd never written a book, and to say, hey, I know people who write books, and I know them. They're not so smart. I can do that. So let me give it a try. And the book that influenced me most was his book, David Halberstam, the great
sure.
fiction writer of the 20th century.
Absolutely.
The Breaks of the Game about
Absolutely.
the Portland Trailblazers in the late 70s.
Great book.
My book sold more, and his book was better written because he was David Halberstam, but he was writing about the Blazers.
Yeah, but your book was a big deal. Listen, the Jordan Rules has existed from that day forward.
Right.
So, I mean, the Jordan Rules is a big part of basketball.
Right, but he wrote about the Blazers when Bill Walton was injured. I had the good fortune to write about the Bulls when Michael Jordan exploded and the Bulls won a championship. So I happened to be at the right place at the right time, and it's been good fortune for me.
But that was
better fortune for them.
Yeah, that was a big deal, though. It really was. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, that whole relationship, that part of history in the NBA is a very big. It took. Magic and Bird breathed life and respectability back into that league, and then Jordan exploded the whole thing. That's exactly what happened.
Right, and that was right. It was, and David Stern always talked about that. Had coming in with Magic and Bird, sort of getting the NBA up on its feet again.
Yep.
And Michael taking the baton from those guys and Julius Erving, and just carrying it forward to this incredible future that the NBA has enjoyed. But clearly that was propelled by what Michael and the Bulls did in that era, and it's probably can't be repeated, and it won't be because of the dramatic cast of characters. Rodman, the most absurd player we've ever had, Phil Jackson, with the other elements of the Eastern philosophies and Native American traditions, and all the elements of Phil, which made him so unique. And I'm glad in that sense. He had such unfair period, I thought, with the Knicks, with the GM stuff.
I mean, I lived through a lot of that, Sam.
Right.
I can tell you.
And diminished his legacy.
It really
it
did.
To do with him as a coach.
It didn't, but I really, and I could be wrong, but what I saw was I don't think he had his heart in it. I really, and listen, they threw a ton of money at him, and they paid him a fortune. I mean, $50 million and a free apartment and everything else and blah, 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 and a chauffeur, and he was at every event at the Garden and everything else, but I just never felt his heart was in it. I just never did. I think he was out of his element. I really thought that. I really felt that.
Well, he probably not negative toward Phil, but the Knicks were using him at his purposes. They needed
Yes.
a credible figure at the head of the organization because of what was going on. And I think Phil sort of, like any of us, saw an opportunity to try something he's never done. But as you know, with the Knicks, there's a lot of limitations and handcuffs, even if you're, quote, in charge. And so, that's a very Byzantine organization to try to work through.
I also think he was some guys are coaches, and I think he was probably a coach, and some guys probably aren't great general managers who are coaches. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know what? Michael Jordan may not be the best executive.
Oh, he's proved that. Yes, I mean he's clearly proved that. Absolutely.
But it should never diminish who he was and what he accomplished. And I kind of felt like New York carried that over. Wanted to diminish Phil beyond that because of what happened with the GM. And I'm glad to see in this people are seeing, not only how good, but how unique Phil was, and especially.
Yeah, I don't think one should affect the other. I really,
No.
I don't. And he was a bit of disappointment here, and I think it was an ugly era, but I don't think it diminishes 1 minute what he did with the Bulls, which was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Is there anything misunderstood in your mind about Jordan? And now I know he's a complex guy. I know he's a guy who's very private, and he probably hasn't shown everybody in his life everything. But I mean, is there anything you ever noticed that you think was misunderstood about him?
I don't feel so much that, other than I think the sort of decency and humanity and just playfulness of who he was as a kid coming into the NBA, how much he wanted to enjoy it, and even that thing we talked about with Isaiah and the alleged freeze out. He really he even though he was already weeks into his career, he was a star. He really just wanted to be one of the guys when he got to the All-Star game, which I think bothered him, upset him that, I really, I respect Bird and I respect Magic and I respect Isaiah. And, I just want to be one of the guys too. And, sort of the economics separated him. So, I think people didn't get a chance to see him because they weren't paying attention in the 80s to who he was as we were, because the NBA was all about, Bird and Magic, and then the Knicks with Ewing, and in fact, I even remember when I proposed the Jordan rules, virtually every attempt I made to sell it, or the New York, I got letters of rejection from all these New York publishers saying, well, who's this? It's just some guy scores a lot of points. What's that? We're not interested in that. And so I think people, didn't get to see and sort of didn't know who Jordan was then. And then I think they didn't recognize the extent of this mania as a competitor, with the settling scores and grudges. And, he still made at Jeff Van Gundy for implying that, he put guys in his movies to get under to win them over to their side. And so this incredible competitiveness and inability to forget anything that's happened. I think that's also this element of him that people don't see, that he's written down names in his mind, and he doesn't forget, as we saw, with Isaiah in that film already.
No, he keeps grudges. He holds them a long time. Absolutely, very close to the vest. No, there's no question. Well, listen, appreciate it. I hope you're doing well. I appreciate the time. Enjoy the rest of this. Thanks very much. I appreciate you coming on.
Great. Good to talk to you.
My
again.
pleasure. Thank you, Sam. All right. Sam Smith, the guy who, like I said, was closer to that team, wrote the Jordan rules, as you know, and, again, was the go-to guy for us. I can't tell you how many times, as Sam said, he would come on with us. We'd be courtside at the Garden. We'd be courtside in Chicago. And he would come on and spend a half hour with us or 45 minutes with us or whatever before a playoff game. And he'd have the lowdown on what was going on with the Bulls and what was going on with Phil or with Krause or with the player or with it, because he knew. I mean, he was around that team every day. And he, obviously was someone who chronicled every big day they ever had. And that's the guy I thought of, because I don't remember anybody who had the lowdown better than Sam did on the team. He really did. And he did it in a very, as you can tell, he didn't get too high, didn't get too low, didn't thrust himself into the middle of it, still looked at it as a reporter, and, watched as this amazing era ran forward.